Welcome, everybody. My name is Olka Joshi Hansen. I'm Chief Program Officer at Grantmakers for Education. Really happy you could join us today for the information session about our Equity Storytelling Fellowships. This program, was born out of an experience I had to be part of the playwriting workshop with Mark and Jess years ago at an Ed Funders conference. I can't even remember where it was. It might have been the one in San Diego. But when I, came to Ed Funders, it was at this moment when conversations about equity, racial justice were really, emerging and sort of percolating in a strong way. And as part of the programming for the organization, we thought really hard about what it is to make these concepts real. Because to my mind, equity is not so much work that you do, but it's a way of showing up in the world. And so we talked with Mark and Jess about potentially putting together a program at conference and for members, especially for leaders of color, to really dig into the work of racial justice and equity, but to also have a space where they could do it together and personally, and hopefully kind of come out with a new and different set of thinking about this work. So this is our third year of offering the fellowship. I'm going to leave it to Mark and Jess to give you the details, but really happy that you're here and considering taking part. And I will hand it over to Mark and Jess.
Great. Thank you so much. We're so excited to be here. I'm going to share some slides. Okay, so again, thank you all for being here and spending some of your morning with us to learn about this fellowship program. We're really excited to be partnering with Ed Funders. Thank you all again for the invitation. This is such important work for us, and have the chance to do it with you all is so incredibly wonderful. So thank you, Olka, for the welcome. Okay, so my name is Mark Chun, and my partner in crime is
Oh, sorry. I was reading all of the chats. I was reading everyone thanking everyone, and I thought that was really beautiful. Jessica Mealy.
okay. And we can tell you more about ourselves, but we've had the honor and privilege to be able to put together different versions of these workshops over the years, and we're really excited to have this wonderful opportunity this year. Here's our agenda for today. So we just had our welcome. Thank you, Olka. I'm going to talk a bit about the fellowship programs and talk about the two different options we have this year. And then Jess is going to lead a panel of past fellows and program participants, and they're going to share a bit about their experience. I think really that's the most important part, to hear what they experienced and hear what they took away from the experience. And then we're going to leave time at the end for questions and answers. So we're going to invite you to add any questions, comments, thoughts into the chat, and we'll get to those at the very end of our time. So I'm going to start by talking about the fellowships. And they're really grounded on four big ideas that sort of coalesce into the way that we're structuring the two fellowship offerings. The first big idea is that everyone has a story to tell. We think everyone has a point of view, a thought, a way in which we can think about what this world might look like. And everyone also has the ability to tell stories. And our job is really just to nurture that, help you practice that, and be able to get better at that. So big idea, everyone has a story to tell. Second big idea, and this reflects back what Olka shared, that we can harness the power of storytelling to explore the intersection of equity and philanthropy. And I think there's lots of ways, lots of questions that we can be asking, and storytelling gives us a way into that. The third big idea is that stories can hold up a mirror to how things are, and also can imagine a way things could be. So it can reflect back the successes, the challenges that we're facing within the space of philanthropy, but it also can give us a chance to think, here's how it could be, and we can present that for each other to be able to have a conversation and discussion. And then the fourth big idea is, we know these can be really difficult times, and you might not be able to change how others think, but telling your story can at least help them to understand how you think. And I think that's a very first important step in our conversations around equity. So these are the four big ideas, and these inform the way that Jess and I have put together the workshops you're going to hear about in just a moment. Okay, so in 2024, Ed Funders launching two fellowship opportunities, Olka said. First in the spring, and we put the times in there, they're going to be Fridays. They're going to be 6 Fridays over the course of the spring. And the second one is during the fall, again, 6 Fridays, and then also an in-person workshop you're going to hear about in just a moment. So that's the timing, one in the spring, one in the fall, and they serve different purposes with some different goals. So in the spring, it's going to be a chance to tell a story through playwriting. So what does that mean? It means there's going to be hands-on writing opportunities throughout the 6 weeks. We get to practice those building blocks of playwriting. It's going to be conducted entirely over Zoom, so it's all virtual, so you can do it in the comfort of your home or your office, and a chance to like connect with other cohort members during that time. Third, it's open to all funders. So this is something that all Ed Funders members are welcome to participate in. And the fourth part is going to culminate in a performance by professional actors. And so you're going to be writing a play, and we have a bunch of fantastic actors who've done this with us before, performing over Zoom, and they're going to present your play for your friends, your family, your colleagues, anyone you like to invite. So it really is sort of exciting to be able to have that ultimate showcase for your work. So that's a spring fellowship. The fall fellowship is a chance to tell a story and engage in different aspects of theatricality. And so again, there'll be hands-on writing, but it's going to be more about storytelling in terms of solo performance for the most part. It's hybrid Zoom and in person, as I said, the 6 weeks over Zoom, and then it leads up to a pre-conference at the GFE before the GFE conference. Third, this is open to funders of color. So our focus here is to create a safe and healing space for funders of color to come together to think about the stories that they want to tell. And then finally, there's an optional opportunity to present your story in person at the conference. And Jess is going to say more about that. So this is not mandatory, but we have found in the past that folks are really excited about the stories they want to tell. And everyone who wanted to was able to do that at the conference. So again, optional opportunity if you'd like to. So those are the key differences between the online portions of the spring and the fall. And I'm going to pass it to Jess, who's going to talk about what will happen in person in Minneapolis.
So before I do that, I just want to say a couple of things about like how I'm coming to this work right now. I spent 8 years in philanthropy at the Hewlett Foundation, part of that with Mark. I was in the performing arts program. Mark was in the education program. And then alongside that, throughout my childhood and adolescence and adulthood, I've also had a creative practice in theater and writing. And I had really kept them separate for most of my professional career. I wouldn't invite people from work to my shows, and because that was really scary and vulnerable for me. And in the last couple of years that I was in philanthropy, I started to really feel, and we were at Hewlett, which is like very, let's use our minds to solve problems. And I really missed the heart aspects of what brought me to this work. I found that combining my creative process with the work that I had been involved in for so long in nonprofits and in philanthropy was the solution that I needed to bring more play and more of a connection to my heart back into the work. And so that is how I'm showing up to this in-person conference. It's as much a learning opportunity for me as I'm reconnecting with my feelings that I kept out of the office. I kept out of professional Jess for a really long time. And that I've come to realize are really key to connecting with the values that draw me to this work. So that's a little bit about me and how I'm showing up. For folks who come to the pre-conference, we have 5 outcomes, and some of these are applicable to the virtual piece as well. But the first one being truth, and that meaning there's no absolute truth. It's about communicating what's true for you in the manner that makes most sense to you. Also, tell the story that is yours to tell. Everyone has a story, and it's always interesting. Never doubt that. The second is character. So explore the point of view and character and storytelling that could be yours, that could be people that you know in the field that you have worked with, mentors, proteges, parents, children. We're going to play with character and explore character a little bit. Embodiment. So this is the thing that we can only do when we're in a room together. And it adds a dimension to the writing that is really deepening and different than when you're just putting pen to paper and that's the only mode of expression. We're going to deepen the writing through movement and collaboration. And we're really going to have fun together. And I hope that some folks on the panel can speak to this, because the idea is that this is meant to be a fun, creative space where we support each other. The final piece is share, a final piece to perform, and it is optional. Sharing is a really important part of this because it is your opportunity to tell your story, and that point of connection between you and the other folks at the conference is powerful. And please don't ever doubt that. I've heard from people who have never done the workshop but have only gone to the performance in 2022 and 2023 who have said how powerful it was for them to hear these stories, to make the connections that they make with their own lived experience. It really, really is powerful. And it's possible because we work really hard to create a collaborative, safe, and supportive environment for you to share your stories. And there are many ways to share. You could do that yourselves. You could have someone else perform your story. You could do it with a group. We had one year in 2022, someone had experienced a loss that made sharing just too tender for them. And so what they did is they created a poem based on snippets of words and phrases that they had heard people say throughout the day, their fellow participants, and it became a group project, and the whole group performed it together in 2022. And Michelle and Alicia were part of that. It was really beautiful. So what does this look like? This looks like theater exercises that are pretty simple. Things like walk around the room as you were when you were 8 years old. And we explore how your body moves, how your body feels, elements of the five senses as you remember being 8 years old, or walk around the room as you were when you were 15. Or think of a person you know who personally who you admire for how they show up for equity. Think of how they hold themselves and how they move, and then put your body in a pose of that person, and then we'll work with that. Or think of a person who is part of your legacy. And we use a legacy in a really loose, it could be your artistic legacy, it could be your professional legacy, it could be your family, it could be someone you imagine is your ancestor. So a lot of this kind of embodiment and imagining and playing with, and we play with that in terms of speed and sound and space and movement and interaction with others in the space. And then after each of those kind of movement improvisations, you write. You do a written reflection or a free write, or sometimes I will give you a prompt to get you into the writing, so that the writing and the movement and the play are in conversation with each other. And then one thing that Mark and I both really, really, really believe in and have tried to embed in this workshop is how valuable reflecting and revising is to creative work. So we try to give you the opportunity to revise at least twice before we get to the day of sharing. Based on feedback or based on a prompt. Sometimes I'll throw you a really silly prompt, and some of the best things have come out of that. And by best, I mean most delightful and insightful. There was a prompt that I gave to someone last year that was, okay, take that story that you wrote, and now it is a campfire horror story. And he turned this story of like a foundation board retreat into a horror story, and it was so insightful and very funny and it really, really delightful. So we try to play, we try to have fun, and also it will involve being vulnerable, and it will involve being in your body. And my experience of philanthropy is that doesn't happen that often in philanthropy. So I hope that it is a joyous experience. So that's a little bit about the in-person portion that we will be doing together in Minneapolis.
Great. All right. And feel free to add any questions, comments into the chat. We'll get to those in a bit. So now I want to just bring into the room some voices of past fellows, past participants, and then we're going to turn to our panel. So this is what some folks who participated in years past have shared. They've noted it's rare that you do professional development that actually immediately changes your practice, that it's life-giving and life-changing, that it felt this person felt it offered something important to the broader community, built our connections, and enriched each of us personally. Someone said, I had such a good time writing and connecting with other grant makers. Oopsie. Someone said, I think everyone should be empowered to be their authentic self, especially in a world where everyone, especially people of color, can't. And finally, a unique professional development experience unlike any other. It also provides an opportunity to really deepen our work as funders in a way that you don't normally retain from other conferences or workshops. So we're just really excited that folks found the experience to be important to them, valuable to them, with some key takeaways. So I'm going to hand it off to Jess now, who's going to facilitate a panel of stories from folks. So Jess, take it away.
Thanks, Mark. And I should also say, every time we do this workshop, we usually have kind of an anchoring point of inquiry. So in 2022, it was what would philanthropy look like if funders of color could bring their full selves to their work? And in 2023, it was, how do you show up on equity on a scale of small changes make a big impact, or go big or go home? And this is really just an entry point to get into the creative process. Okay, so we're going to start, we're going to go chronologically with how people have experienced different iterations of the workshop. And the first two panelists wrote a play. And the third and fourth panelists wrote their own performance piece in the in-person workshop that we did in 2022 for funders of color. And I don't even remember where that was. Where were we geographically when we did that? It was a hotel. If anyone remembers, put it in the chat.
Austin.
Thank you.
Austin.
Austin. Okay, so Chris Shearer, why don't you begin by giving us a sense of what do you want people to know about your experience from doing this workshop? And you wrote a play in 24 hours, if I recall.
I did. I was a part of the pilot of the program, which is like in 2017 or something like that, I mean, forever ago. I think there are three things I would tell everybody. The first is really around equity. At that time, we were on the 50th anniversary of the Kerner Commission on race and division and disparities in the United States, and so much in those 50 years hadn't changed, and in fact had kind of gotten worse. Some of those metrics that the Kerner Commission reported on. And it really called into question the behavior of white society for racial discrepancy in the country. And as a middle-aged white guy, I wanted to spend some serious time with that question for me, and for me as a philanthropist. And it was at the time also that philanthropy was really waking up to the fact that rising tide lifts all boats was not a deep enough commitment. So it was a good chance for me to put personal and practice together and really think about equity. What I did was I wrote a play that riffed off of Waiting for Godot called Waiting for Kerner. And it was really just about how we go through a bunch of motions, but nothing ever really changes and no one really intends to change anything. The second thing I would say is that my undergraduate and graduate degrees were in English literature, and I wrote my thesis on a play, but I'm not a playwright, and I never had been. And so just being in a safe and supportive place to be creative and to get into playwriting, which I had sort of thought about intellectually but not really done, was incredibly helpful. It was so much fun, and it was so creative and engaging for me, and I felt incredibly supported in doing it. It was so much of what we do professionally is this high stakes kind of tightrope walk, and this was really a sort of all beginners, come and do your thing and feel supported. And that made a big difference for me. And the last thing I would say was really just a personal thing. Is it's unbelievable to see the thing that you did. This is more like what the spring session is going to be about, but it's unbelievable to see what you did then performed by professional actors. I mean, it was just, philanthropy is so much about delayed gratification. I mean, you don't do anything, and you're very often supporting people who work with people who do things, and you're so removed from the gratification of the action, and it's so filtered through process and everything else. It was just amazing to write something in 24 hours and then see professional actors do it in front of me and everybody else. And so that was just, I don't know, that was memorably fun and worth the time that I had put into it leading up to it. So those are the three things I would say.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm going to move on to Brooke, and we're going to do kind of one question for each person, and then we'll open it up to everyone to ask questions from the whole panel. Brooke, why don't you, would you tell us a little bit, and I'm sorry, we didn't ask folks to introduce themselves. So Chris, would you mind introducing yourself, and then we'll go back to you, Brooke, and you can begin by introducing yourself and telling folks what you would like them to know about your experience.
Sure. I'm a career philanthropoid. I've spent 25, 30 years in the field. And right at the time of the pandemic, I was done with my last job, and so I hung up my own shingle as a consultant.
Thanks, Chris. Brooke?
So my name is Brooke Treadwell. I'm currently at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. I've been there for about 6 years now. It took lots of twists and turns along the way to get there, but sort of have a background in education and teacher training, and doing that in many different contexts. What I would say about, well, let me add this. I had not I wrote a play in middle school. And that was the last time I had written a play before this playwriting workshop that I did with Mark and Jess. So, I think about, why did I even sign up for this? And I think I saw this opportunity. I thought, oh my goodness, a play that I could write would be performed by professional actors. It just felt like an unbelievable opportunity. So I sign up for it, just sort of on a whim. As I approach the door of the actual workshop, I'm like walking there, I'm approaching the door. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just signed up to write a play. I have zero experience. I haven't even read a play since like middle school or high school, never mind written one. So I was just so fresh to this. And I think, so I came in nervous, sat down. I loved the warm-up activities we did with the group, how it put me, like, we were able to connect with other folks that were there using some of the prompts, like walk around like you're 8 years old. That was a wonderful way to go about it. Then the prompts to start the writing, I had a story in me that I didn't know was there before. Um, I grew up in a very almost all white segregated environment, and it was a really interesting process to look into my childhood and say, what story about equity and inequity in education and trying to push for equity? The education system I was in, I think people supported equity in theory, but had very little background in how to do that. So, like, how we can be inept in doing that and fumbling our way forward. So there was a story in me that I had to tell that ended up being funny when it was performed by professional actors. So I was so thrilled to see that. As I was writing the play, we had a chance to sit with some of the actors, and sort of talk through our like challenges with writing it. So it felt it was a way to help me get unstuck as I was writing my play, and it started to flow more. And I will say, this was back in 2018. I think I was in philanthropy then. I cared deeply about equity and education, which was our topics, but I wasn't talking about it openly with my colleagues as often and as deeply as I wanted to be. And to both have this opportunity to dig into my own background and tell a story was much more approachable way of getting to the equity conversations I wanted to be having. And then to see everyone's play showed side by side, it was so many different equity related stories that was like a gorgeous array of perspectives on equity and inequity that we could really dig into. So, and I've never forgotten it. Like, it was almost like a springboard for my own thinking and courage to be much more outspoken about equity. And now I feel like um, I'm in such a different place, in part because of this storytelling workshop. So I'm just so grateful for this, and I'm so glad it's being offered again. And yeah, those were the key takeaways for me.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Olka, by the way, I found Brooke and Chris's plays that they wrote, and I also found your play, 88 Keys, in hard copy. So I'll send you a PDF later. So we're we're going to move on to Michelle and Alicia, who experienced the 2022 cohort for funders of color at the conference, both in advance on Zoom and then at the conference. Michelle, I'd love if you could come forward and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience.
Hi, everyone. Michelle Hadamijo, I'm the Director of Education Initiatives here at the San Diego Foundation. I think I love the way Brooke described walking towards the room and thinking, what did I do? I am so glad you shared that because I hadn't really thought about it, but I actually, as I was visualizing you, I thought, that was kind of how I was walking towards the room. And thinking, what am I doing? This is nuts. Who is somebody gonna put me on a stage? What? But I had the privilege of participating in that session in 22 in Austin with Alicia and our friends. And it sounds maybe a little exaggerated to say, but it's not. I did a lot of healing. I did a lot of healing that I didn't even know I needed healing for in that session, and in the work the practice I brought back into my life because of it. We moved through a very sort of quick exercise of Jessica, you'll correct me if I'm sort of using the wrong terminology, but theatric practice, right? The blocking, the sort of improvisational practice, and then got to writing or continued the writing. And this piece that you named around reflecting and revising, I remember very poignantly feeling a lot of fear about creating in the moment, but then feeling comfort in knowing that I can come back to this. I can come back. And that to me was a very practical takeaway for the work, right? That we do as grant makers. Is that practice of reflecting and revising in community and with community around how we make the investments that we make. So then as I moved through the process, I unpacked how code switching had impacted me as I grew up, and how I had practiced code switching in a way that completely buried who I was, and I could not bring my authentic self to the work because in certain ways I'd almost lost touch with who my authentic self was. And then we performed, and I mentioned that I would thank my high school drama teacher, John O'Neill, for my Oscar the day I win it, and I say that to say, like, there was a part of me when I was young that had this practice of theater. And again, just buried because I have to be this professional self in this professional world. And that this practice is actually what makes me closer to the work and to my purpose in the work. But it was gone. And so the session really reconnected me with that practice. And I want to offer a fifth tenet, Mark and Jessica, if I can be so bold, is that we all have a creative practice to celebrate. And I mean that, like, some folks will say, oh, I don't have a creative bone in my body. Phooey. Like, there is something artistic and creative that you enjoy. And who cares if you're good at it or not? There is something creative in your life that you enjoy. practice, like do your practice. The way you do your yoga and your, try to eat a good diet and try to do all the things that are good for you. Do your creative practice because it's good for you in whatever way, you playwright, you act, you write poetry, you paint, you whatever it is. So I really reconnected with that. The way artistic and creative practice is, I really need it in my life. I really, really need it.
Thank you, Michelle. As usual, you have me on the verge of tears. Thank you. I once heard a consultant an artist named Noah Scalin say, creativity is not a bone, it is a muscle. And you need to practice that muscle in order to develop it. And I have found that to feel really true to my own experience. All right, Alicia, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Alicia Baird. I am the Director of Grants Management at Strata Education Foundation based in Indianapolis. And I had the transformative experience of being in the 2022 Storytelling Fellowship. And I will tell you that it was a lot of work in the best way possible because as was mentioned, as Jess mentioned, that, this is a muscle that we have to practice and utilize. I was out of shape and had not used this muscle for quite some time, especially in telling my own story. So initially, as we hopped on Zoom calls, we were getting assignments from Mark and very friendly nudges to complete our assignments if we could. And if we couldn't, it's totally okay. But I felt guilty because I had signed up for this fellowship and I never had time to write and do this thoughtful interaction that I wanted to do, but I couldn't. And so I had to find creative spaces. And for me, they were always like at 3 o'clock in the morning when kids and husband and everybody's asleep. And that's like the only quiet time I could find to reflect and write. But it was very helpful, right, to start to get into that mode and try to tap into how I would tackle situations or how I might look at, retelling a story from poetic lens or whatever prompts that we were given from Mark, because I was not in that mode. I am in a corporate writing mode. I am in a quick problem solving, get something out for a board member or for an executive team member, writing back and forth to grantees on behalf of my organization. So as far as my own personal voice, I wasn't comfortable just authentically writing in that voice. So it took a lot of work for me to actually get to my voice and get comfortable writing in that space. Because then every time I wrote, I thought, well, this is terrible. I can't do anything with this. Like I couldn't send this out to my vice president well, it's not for the vice president. It was for me to tell my story. And how do I get comfortable just even sharing my own story with others? So and we had a great practice because not only were we writing, but then we were sharing with our other fellows and they were responding. Well, then there's a moment that you feel you're going to be critiqued and you're going to get the red line that you would expect in your English 301 class, right? I was expecting the other fellows to just come hard and leave all these terrible messages, but it wasn't that way. So I had to get over myself to get to my own voice. Fast forwarding to the in-person experience that Jess mentioned, we did do a lot of personal interactions and these movement exercises that were transformative and very inspiring that I would have never. When I walked in the door and, we're going through these exercises, there's one part of my brain I'm totally in. And then the other part of my brain, like, I'm just like, really, I've got things to do. I've got things to write. I've got, reports due when I get back into my room that I need to do. And so I was present, but I gave into the experience, right? And there was one that she had mentioned about getting into a physical position when you felt that you couldn't bring your full self to the table. And I remember that I curled up in a ball, and from that position, they told me, "Hey, come and Alicia, you do your position right here." And then others came around me and responded to me. I didn't know what exactly they were doing because I was curled in a ball. But what I did see in my moment, and man, these positions, this is a totally safe space. And I got so into my head about, this moment that I felt bad and I couldn't bring myself to the whole room. And I was just really in this moment. And the room is silent as we're all gathering. But what I did look down and see were people's feet joining around me. There were some people who actually touched my back as I'm hunched over, but they were responsive to me. And I was reminded in that moment that I am not alone. And so all of this head space that I'd gotten into right in that 5-minute exercise, I mean, it felt like it was 3 days, but it was really just a few moments. And they responded to me and came close. And then after we were done with this, then we were given time to write. And from that, I wrote this poem basically about my experience and talking about how, I was in a low point basically, but you came to me, and I talked about how basically all of these people came around me to support me. And because they did, then I am a better person. And because I am a better person, now we are all better people because we can bring our full selves to the table. So that was the piece that was kind of the origin of how I developed my final work that was presented at the GFE conference, the in-person event, which was amazing, right? I mean, I suddenly became not only a poet, I became a performer, and it was inspirational to all and very powerful. And you thought it would end right there. And so I did have a video, and I shared that video with my DE&I friends here in the company and other very close colleagues that were attentive to the work that was happening at GFE. So fast forward, during the summertime 2023, we're doing on-site DE&I training. We've got a full session on asset framing led by Trabian Shorters here in my office. And he was there in the office. And our vice president of DE&I said, "Alicia, I want you to perform the piece that you emailed. I saw your video from GFE. I would like for you to perform that piece." So in front of all of our senior leadership and executive staff, Trabian Shorters, who actually attended our 2022 event, he was there. He was not at he was not at our performance session. He came into our conference session much later. So he didn't see our performances, but he was actually there in the room. So here I get to say, well, I performed this and I opened up our session with that piece. A vulnerable piece, but again, it was right in line with asset framing about how when I am strengthened as an individual, then I am strengthened as a professional. And if I am strengthened as a professional, then we are all strengthened together and we can do much bigger things and better things than we ever would have before. So I say all of that to say, this is a life-transforming experience that I participated in 2022. I had looked forward to participating in 2023, but the family took a trip to Disney and I couldn't back out of that one. So I had other plans, but I hopefully can participate again in 2024. This is definitely something that people should do.
Thank you so much, Alicia. The siren call of Disney is hard to avoid when you have children, as I know myself. I loved so much of what you said, and one thing that I want to just call out is the groups that we have had in the last 2 years really created a strong bond with each other. It was really a sense of community by the end of just a day. Dylan Tran, who was in our 2023 cohort, said he joined this workshop because he wanted to meet other funders of color. And by the end of the day, they had really strong relationships that they took outside of the conference session. I also want to bring up another thing that I heard in Alicia's story, which is that in philanthropy, often we are required to write for specific audiences. And I'll speak for myself. I learned to write for that audience, which was, someone in a position of authority within my hierarchical philanthropic organization. It was very cerebral. It was case making. And what we have to do often in these workshops is, and what a peer funder who saw the performance in 2022 and in 2023 said, I noticed that somehow you were able to release them, or they released themselves from that kind of philanthropy speak to a particular audience to persuade. This is not a persuasion workshop. This is really about connecting with what's in you already, what already lives there, the stories that are already inside you, and telling them that in the way that is most meaningful to you. So it's a very different kind of writing, and it has just been such a deep pleasure to experience the stories that you guys have written.
And as Michelle had mentioned, it's so healing for us to go through these experiences, to share these stories that were pent up or that we hadn't even processed, that we move through the world in certain ways or have the weights that we carry. And so it's not that we don't carry them. I think it was just acknowledging that we do carry these weights. And similar to others, we're all carrying our own weights. So how do we better recognize that? And that's just as funders, let alone the populations that we serve. And we publicly acknowledge the weights that our target populations are carrying, because we talk about those. But we as individuals and professionals, we don't talk about our personal weights and learn how to deal with and comfortably work through that space. So thank you again, Mark and Jess, for such powerful opportunities.
Thank you. Brooke, did you have a question?
I actually wanted to just double click on something that I think Alicia referred to and Jess, you referred to, which is this is such a different way to learn. What I'll say is, and I didn't say this before, in my current role at Hewlett, I'm the Culture, Race, and Equity Officer that works with all of our staff, about 130 of us, to deepen our thinking on equity and justice and embed it more in our work. And just reminding myself again about this fellowship, like what an amazing, this is another way of learning. I think sometimes with an organization, you want to deepen equity and justice in what you do, and you are hitting like a sort of wall. And I think the storytelling where you're learning in a totally different way, you're taking it away from the abstract and the theoretical and making it personal and telling those personal stories can unlock learning to help you go deeper. So anyway, it's making me think, Jess and Mark, I wonder if you could ever come to Hewlett and do this with those who want to do this here, because I think it can help get at, I think there's like frustration that can build up. And I think if we tell personal and funny stories or different stories, it will help unstick us. So thanks.
Thank you, Brooke. I think you may have just answered Claudia's question about how this practice continues to surface in your current work. So I'm going to move on to Polly's question, if that's all right, about what are some recommended techniques to support this brave sharing. I'm curious if that provokes any response from the panelists.
I will just quickly point to those moments of the movement exercises we don't incorporate much movement in the work that we all do on a day-to-day, except for sitting in front of your Zoom screen at this point in time, or making sure that you turn off your video if you have a laugh or a call that you need to hide. So I think the movement exercises and just being vulnerable, that was new. And I would incorporate, that spawned this brave sharing of us, just walking around the room and feeling in a place, what was the question you asked, Jess? How would you present yourself, come to the table when your whole self, when you bring your whole self into the room, how do you walk, right? And how, when you're at your most confident, what do you do? It's hard to think about that. There are times when you as an individual might bring yourself as less than that into a room, but it's true. And how can we, even as individuals, recognize the differences?
I think this, oh, Michelle, go ahead.
I totally agree with Alicia. They're practical techniques and tools you will learn that bolster you for that sharing. The other thing that you would lean into is the bond that develops between the cohort participants, because Jessica named it, and it's very true. In a very, very short period of time, as you're moving through this exercise, you really connect with folks. And I remember getting ready for, like, in the corner of that conference room, ready to take the stage. We were all just bolstering one another, bringing one another up, and you're fine, you're safe, you're good.
I would echo that and say it almost is a kind of, like, two techniques that I saw kind of merging together were the professional supports that you got, right? The sort of the tactics and the techniques and the improv and all of this sort of time-honored supports, including the feedback from the actors and the chance to revise. All that structure was really helpful in terms of techniques about supporting brave sharing, right? Because you are taking baby steps and you need support. And you see everyone getting that support. And that also brings me, I think, Michelle, to what you're saying is, I would even call that soft peer accountability, right? Everyone is being brave. Everyone is doing this, putting themselves out there personally and in a group. And it's so hard, it's so easy just to not get started. And it's so easy to withdraw and say, well, I'll just watch other people do this. And if everyone's on deck to do it and everyone is being equally supportive and supportive of each other, there is a little bit of that peer accountability, putting yourself into that situation where you do have the homework, other people have done the homework, you need to show up, that pushes you through all the excuses you give yourself not to do that. And so I think those two techniques, that kind of soft, supportive peer accountability and the technical expert supports and structures that come from the field of performance and playwriting, really came together to help make you braver.
I think what I might also add is something we've done every time we've done the performances is afterwards we engage in a extended conversation, a discussion with the audience, the folks who've been there. And we have found that it opens up topics and areas of conversation that might not have happened otherwise because they saw folks being brave and sharing their stories. The fact that they made the stories personal and individual, so they're not like at 30,000 feet, like abstract ideas, but we're seeing it acted out in terms of how a person is experiencing those. So it's also a key part of the experience is being able to engage others in a conversation that comes. It's like the third act of a play. It's like it comes because we just heard these wonderful stories together.
So Leslie asks, can you give an example of something that you've experienced or participated in over the past year or two that benefited from your experience when you thought to yourself, wow, I wouldn't have been able to say that if I hadn't done this workshop? Well, it's a high bar. All right. Anyone, does that bring up any response from the panelists?
Well, the poem that I recreated in front of Trabian Shorters, that definitely that was my bar right there. And because we had had so many new hires at Strata at that moment and the executive level, then I was introducing myself basically to many members of our leadership team. And it was quite a meaningful time, something I would have never, ever have volunteered for or, you know, had been prepared for prior to doing the fellowship that I would have just, you know, opted to do. I would have done it, but I can't say that I would have been as bold and proud in order to share a poem that I've written and to, you know, the beautiful thing was when I was introduced, they did it from the asset framing stance, right? Because we were in the middle of this session. And the woman says, and I would like to introduce Alicia. What you don't know, you know, she's a poet. And I thought, me? A poet? It's like, when do you get that? But it's true, you know, these are the things that we get to claim and the wonderful things that, you know, from the products of the work that we've done. So I will say that the fact that I get to add poet and creative writer into my list of many things is totally unexpected, but a wonderful joy.
And something on this that comes to mind for me is in my work with our 130 staff, with our 17 teams to hold space for them to deepen their equity work, when I hold space for them, I think it's super helpful to set context to and do some activities at the start of those sessions that help us help us all drop into that heart space. So the activities I did in the workshop with Mark and Jess were examples of how to do that. And I think you need to go there to make deep progress on your own thinking on equity, inequity, injustice, and how to push through it. Like when you stay at the surface, you're only going to get so far. And this workshop helped me have clear examples of how to create the space where we can drop into that heart space and have more real, more full self, more authentic conversations.
Something that Jessica said is really sitting with me, and Brooke, you're sort of you just named, I think, why it's sitting with me. So Jessica, you mentioned writing for such a specific audience, and that often, especially those of us that are in program officer roles, when we're writing, we're case making. And I just thought about that. Like there is trauma in sitting at your computer trying to make a logical case for investing in undoing the harm of injustice. I mean, I think we probably lose a little bit of ourselves every time we have to write an email around like why we should invest in this group that is, you know, doing power building around educational policy that we need to change because of the harm it's doing and has done to community over decades. And moving into that space, you know, what are we losing in that space of ourselves, and what do we have to practice to regain that connection with the purpose and our role in it. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but it's one of those things that I think I'm going to sit with for the next couple of days. But thank you for naming like moving into the heart space and then the imperative to do that.
Thank you so much for that. I think that's a great note to end on, even though I don't want to end. So I will give you my deepest gratitude, all four of you. Thank you so much for your time and your honesty and your heart space. And I will pass it back to Olga.
Yeah, just echoing. So Mark and Jess, I hope, first of all, you feel incredibly validated for the kinds of experiences that you've created for people. And Alicia, Michelle, Chris, Brooke, thank you all so much. I've been sitting here and taking it all in, and I just really appreciate the vulnerable and authentic reflections. A couple of them, like you, Michelle, I'm going to be sitting with. Thank you for those of us who joined. I know we're right at the top of the hour. We appreciate you being here, considering this. Really hope to see you as part of the upcoming cohorts. We are going to be having this presentation on our website so that you can share it with folks who you might want to bring with you into this experience, so that you come into it with some folks that you know. And so the video will be available in about a week, and you can sign up for updates. And then I think we have one or two other slides. So if you want to sign up, you can go to EdFunders and you can just click on the link that says Storytelling Fellowship, and it'll take you to the registration page for the spring cohort. So if you have any questions, please let Mark or Jess or myself or Stephanie know in the meantime, and then just some other programs that are coming up in the EdFunders programming calendar. So thank you all. Sorry to take you for an extra minute, but hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and week.